Do you solemnly swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
All right, have a seat there with yourself.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Pull that, if you don't mind, pull that down as close to you as you can. If you would, state your name for the record, please.
Jackie Schultz,
And if you could, would you spell your first and last name?
JACQUIESCHULTZ.
And ma'am, what is your current occupation?
I work for the Department of Children's Services Special Investigations Unit as a lead investigator.
And generally, what do you do in that role?
I supervise two teams of 11 investigators. I sign child abuse referrals and also assist in investigations.
All right. And you're based out of what part of Tennessee?
I have two offices, one in Chattanooga and one in Knoxville.
And are you mainly concentrated in Knoxville?
No, I travel to both.
Travel to both, okay. In the state of Tennessee, is there a mandatory reporting law as to child abuse and also sexual abuse?
Yes.
Okay. And who's a mandatory reporter?
In this state, everyone is a mandated reporter.
Okay. All right. Did you become aware of an incident involving an Ooltewah High School basketball team in December of last year?
Yes.
Okay. And did you undertake an investigation at that point?
Yes.
All right. Now, your investigation can be separate and apart from law enforcement. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And how did you or what were the parameters of your investigation?
We received a referral through our hotline, and it's screened through them. They use a decision tool to make the referral, and it came to us with allegations of lack of supervision.
Okay. And did you at some point learn, so you just looked at lack of supervision only?
Yes.
All right. In your investigation, did it become aware to you that there were allegations that there were 4 freshmen on this basketball team that were physically assaulted and apparently sexually assaulted?
Yes.
Okay. Why would you not investigate that, but only lack of supervision?
Due to the age of the alleged perpetrators and the juvenile victims. Per DCS policy, we investigate allegations of sex abuse on children 12 and under if the offender is not a caretaker or an authority figure. And we investigate allegations of sex abuse on all juveniles under the age of 18 if the perpetrator is a caretaker.
Okay. So that's the only reason you didn't look into that, but you became aware of the physical assaults and the sexual assaults?
Yes.
All right. And how did you go about assigning this particular case to an investigator?
I assigned it to my investigator out of our Blount County office because one of the coaches, Mr. Montgomery, previously worked for our department, and my 2 investigators that are housed in Chattanooga both are familiar with him, and so I wanted to leave it unbiased, and I assigned it to the investigator out of my Blount County office.
So Mr. Montgomery used to work with DCS?
He did.
In what capacity?
He was a foster care worker.
All right. And what does a foster care worker do?
They oversee case management of our children in DCS custody. They attend court hearings, do the permanency plans, take them to doctor's appointments, oversee just their care, and help and work with the parents to reunify them.
All right. If you're a worker in that capacity, does the department make you aware of the mandatory reporting law?
Yes.
Both of the child abuse and the sex abuse?
Yes.
Okay. Do you recall how long he was with DCS?
I'm not certain, but I believe it was more than 5 years.
Okay. And did you become aware of the trip lasted somewhere between the 19th and 23rd in Gatlinburg, Tennessee?
Yes.
With the players staying in a particular cabin?
Yes.
All right. And at some point on the night of the 22nd, one of the freshmen had to be taken to the hospital. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Who took that person to the hospital?
Mr. Montgomery and Mr. Williams.
All right. Was anybody else, adult-wise, advised of the situation at that time?
Yes.
And who was that?
Mr. Montgomery reported that he called Mr. Nadley.
All right. So at this point on the night of the 22nd, we have Mr. Montgomery, Mr. Williams, and Mr. Nathan.
Yes.
And if I ask it, I'm sorry, who took the juvenile to the hospital?
Mr. Montgomery and Mr. Williams.
All right, okay. And at some point, the juvenile takes a second trip back to the hospital, is that correct?
That is correct.
Is that on the 22nd or the 23rd?
It's the early morning hours of the 23rd.
Okay, all right. And then at some point, he has to undergo surgery
Yes.
and an extended stay in the hospital.
That is correct.
All right. What basically did your investigation consist of?
Our investigation is currently still open, but we have interviewed a majority of the basketball players, the coach, the athletic director, assistant coach, the principal, I've spoke with the superintendent and the parents.
Okay. Did you ever interview Mr. Williams?
No, we were unable to.
Okay. Did you interview Mr. Montgomery?
Yes.
All right. Did you ever ask him about whether he reported this matter to DCS or local law enforcement?
I did.
And what was his answer?
That he did not directly call us because the hospital reported that they were calling the police and he felt that his obligation had been met.
All right. Did you ask Mr. Nadley the same question?
No. Well, we did ask him if it was reported, and he reported that he was under the impression that Mr. Montgomery had reported it.
All right. Okay. I guess at some point did you learn they played an additional basketball game after the assaults had occurred?
Yes.
All right. With Mr. Williams and Mr. Nadley being the coaches?
The basketball game the day after the assault, Mr. Montgomery was not present at.
Okay. He was with the juvenile?
Yes.
Do you know how long the juvenile had to stay in the hospital?
I believe it was a week or 8 days.
A week or 8 days? Okay. And just to be clear, the assault behavior occurred in Sevier County, Tennessee.
It did.
Obviously. The juveniles that were assaulted reside in Hamilton County, Tennessee.
They do.
Okay. And in your investigation, did anyone within Ooltewah High School, be it principal, staff, teacher, coach, otherwise, report any of this to the local DCS or local law enforcement?
No.
Okay. And what about anybody with the Hamilton County Department of Education?
No.
That'd be all at this time, Vernon?
Mr. Bowler, do you have a question? Good morning, Ms. Schultz.
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm good.
Have you ever been made aware that Investigator Barnes called DCS in Sevier County and no one answered the phone?
Objection, Your Honor, I think that is a violation of confidentiality statute because it's aimed to get at the referral.
No, it's not, Your Honor. All right. It is simply to establish the truth of the matter that he called, not who called. I'm not asking.
You asked specifically whether a person called.
I'm not asking her to identify an individual. I'm asking if in the course of her investigation she became aware, and I'll just rephrase.
Excuse me, before we rephrase, could we, for the record, somebody from the audience stood up?
That was Miss Dot Ray. Miss Ray, stand up and introduce yourself, please.
My name is Dr. Ray. I'm the Regional General Counsel for the Department of Children's Services.
I would object to her staying in the audience and raising objections unless she's going to take a seat at the council table.
And you may do that since
Council.
this is your client on the
This is
stand.
a representative from my client, Your Honor.
Yeah, you may move up to council table.
Thank you.
According to the way we have a transcript, to
Right.
make sure we know who's
Thank you,
talking.
Mr. Davis. Mr. Bowe, you want to?
I'll just rephrase it.
Okay.
Are you aware of law enforcement called DCS on Christmas Eve on the 24th? DCS in Sevier County.
I'm not aware of that.
Right. Have you looked at the call logs or the records for DCS in Sevier County to obtain information as to whether or not law enforcement called?
I have.
Okay. Now, you told Mr. Pinkston a second ago that you didn't look into allegations of sexual assault with the 4 freshmen. Is that accurate? Is that what you said?
That's not listed as one of our allegations. It's the scope of our investigation surrounds that incident, but is not listed as an allegation in our investigation.
Okay. Are you familiar with DCS administrative policies and procedures?
I am.
Okay. Are you familiar with Administrative Policy and Procedure 14.1, Child Abuse Hotline?
Yes.
Okay. When was the last time you saw that Administrative Procedure 14.1?
It has been a while.
Okay. Do you need a chance to review that?
Yes,
When
please.
we talk about it?
Go ahead.
Ms. Schultz, after you review that, just let me know. refresh your recollection as to 14.1 in child abuse hotline
Yes.
policies and procedures?
Yes.
Commissioner, take part, John.
You may.
Policy 14.1, page 3, defines child sex abuse. Does it not?
That is correct.
It also contains relationship criteria.
That is correct.
Correct?
Yes.
First, let's discuss this. Under the definition of child sex abuse, there is no section within the administrative policies and procedures that dictates child on child, is there? And if you find it, please read it.
Not in this policy.
Okay. There is no section under the Child Abuse Hotline 14.1 Administrative Policies and Procedures for DCS that identifies that a child who is not in the home of another child can commit sex abuse on a child, is there?
Not in this policy, no.
Would you read the relationship criteria in the Child Abuse Hotline policy that's established for mandatory reporting?
If the report alleges sex abuse of a child 13 through 17, it must be a parent, caregiver, or relative, regardless of where the relative lives, a person living in the home, an educator, volunteer, or employee of an educational, recreational, organizational setting who is responsible for the care of the alleged victim, or an individual providing treatment, care, or supervision for the alleged victim.
Nowhere in there does it say child on child, does it?
No.
Nowhere in there does it say a child under the age of 13 or over the age of 13, does it?
No.
And that's what you mean when you told Mr. Pinkston it didn't meet criteria,
That is correct.
because the alleged perpetrators here are 15 to 17,
That is correct.
and the alleged victim is 15.
That is correct.
Consequently, it did not meet criteria for child sex abuse as defined in 14.1 Child Abuse Hotline.
That is correct.
Okay. Now, I noticed that you said not in that policy. Are you familiar with Workaid 1, CPS categories and definitions of abuse and neglect?
I am.
Okay. Do you contend that it would otherwise explain child-on-child sex abuse?
It goes to, I gotta review that one as well.
Commissioner Young? You bet. Ready? Okay. Let's go through that Workaid 1, CPS categories and definitions of abuse and neglect. Category A is physical abuse.
Yes.
Okay. Would you read that definition, physical abuse?
Any non-accidental physical injury or trauma that could cause injury inflicted by a parent, caretaker, relative, or any other person who is responsible for the care, supervision, or treatment of the child.
Okay. So non-accidental. That's the first criterion for physical abuse.
Yes.
The second would be that series of individuals responsible for the care, supervision, or treatment of the child.
Yes.
Parent, caretaker, relative, or any other person.
Yes.
And adult.
Correct.
Would you turn to page 4 of that same page number 1, CPS categories and definitions of abuse and neglect? That category is sexual abuse.
Yes.
Would you read that definition, please?
Child sexual abuse occurs when a child who is under the age of 13 or was under the age of 13 when the abuse occurred, or a child is 13 to 18 and meets the relationship criteria per policy, and the child is involved in the intentional sexual acts that produce sexual arousal or gratification for the perpetrator, including, and then the list, if you would like me to read those.
No, that's okay. Now, here, do you have any information that there was some sexual act that produced sexual arousal?
No.
Do you have any information that there was some sexual gratification for the perpetrator?
No.
And we discussed that the alleged perpetrators and the alleged victim are 15 to 17.
Correct.
Now, that's,
And if we can be clear, there's 4 victims, not just 1.
do you know the ages of all the victims?
Yes.
What are the ages of the alleged victims?
They're all between the ages of 14 and 17.
14 and 17. Now, with respect to the child sexual abuse, Work 8-1 in support of 14.1 Child Abuse Hotline, which is the hotline number that the mandatory reporting law is designed for the individuals to call, correct? Okay. In that, the relationship criteria that's discussed wasn't met here in this case based on the facts that you became aware of in your investigation, was it?
Not for child sex abuse, no.
So to child abuse. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, what was
The
the question?
relationship criteria with respect to child abuse was not met in this case either, was it?
For lack of supervision.
No. My question was between the perpetrator and the alleged victim.
Then no.
Okay. Are you familiar with Hamilton County Board of Education Descriptor Code 6.409, child abuse and neglect?
No.
Are you familiar with any of the Hamilton County Board of Education reporting requirements for teachers?
No.
Are you familiar with the Tennessee Educators Act?
No.
Are you familiar with 4301, which requires teachers to report to designated officials?
No.
Are you familiar with 1601, the Teachers Education Act, which requires teachers to report
No.
suspicions of abuse or neglect?
No.
Okay. Let's back up for a second. In your training as an SIU lead investigator, with respect to schools, teachers, do you have any specialized training with respect to what their requirements are or are not in,
Yes.
in the fulfillment of their duties as a teacher to a
Yes.
school board?
I have little knowledge.
And how did you obtain that knowledge? Did you go to a seminar?
I have been to several seminars and then through our legal counsel in Nashville.
Okay, so let's slow down. Did you go to a seminar for Teachers Education Act obligations, duties, and responsibilities?
Not specifically titled that way.
Did you attend any training for teachers under the Teachers Education Act?
No.
Okay. Are you familiar and did you attend any training for Hamilton County Board of Education?
No.
When you spoke to Mr. Nadley, did you speak to Mr. Nadley?
I did.
Did you ask if there had been any training done? Did you receive any training?
I don't know that I specifically asked that question. I do not recall.
When you spoke to Mr. Williams, did you ask if he received any training?
I didn't get to speak to Mr. Williams.
And when you spoke with Mr. Montgomery, did you ask if he obtained any training?
No.
Okay. Now, you just told us as a DCS lead investigator for the SIU that none of the factual circumstances here met the relationship criteria necessary for child sexual abuse. And then you said that Mr. Montgomery worked for DCS as a foster care worker and had knowledge, just like you, of the relationship criteria.
Correct.
Okay. How then do you conclude if the relationship criteria wasn't met that triggered the obligation for his duty.
That calls for the factual determination that the court would make, not the witness.
Your Honor, she's an investigator, and she's charged with putting those pieces together and reaching that conclusion. She's also sitting here telling you that she's concluding that there's lack of supervision and some other things that are dependent upon the DCS policies.
All right, I'll allow you to ask the question.
Shall I rephrase the question?
Yes, please.
Mr. Montgomery, as a DCS foster care worker, has the same training that you do, the same knowledge that you just repeated here today, based on 14.1 Child Abuse Hotline Administrative Policy and Procedures reporting.
Correct.
You just told us that the fact instances here did not meet the relationship criteria required to conclude sexual abuse, that you would investigate sexual abuse.
Correct.
Okay. Under the mandatory reporting law, if, as you've indicated today, that it's not sexual abuse because it didn't meet the criteria, what's Mr. Montgomery supposed to report?
It's my understanding of the law that anybody who suspects any type of abuse or neglect has to report it, not just child sex abuse.
Okay. And you understand that the complaint filed here is that he didn't report child sex abuse.
I'm not specifically
You're not familiar
Sure.
with the complaint?
I know that it's failure to report. I know it's specifically child sex abuse.
Okay. Internal policy.
I don't know Hamilton County's internal policy.
So you're investigating these three gentlemen for failing to do something that they're required to do under the Tennessee Educators Act pursuant to their terms of employment, but you don't know what those terms are.
I'm not investigating them for failure to report. I'm investigating the allegations of lack of supervision.
Okay. But we're here today in a preliminary hearing about failing to report.
Correct. But I did not file those charges because as a representative from the department, we did not do that.
Okay. So then, if you're not here to talk about child sexual abuse on these facts, if you're not here to confirm that in fact these facts don't arise to child sexual abuse to trigger reporting, and you're only here to talk about lack of supervision, which isn't part of this preliminary hearing, what value do you add today?
I don't know.
You don't have to answer that.
Ms. Schultz, are you aware that Mr. Montgomery and Mr. Williams took the child to the hospital?
I am.
And are you aware that the hospital released them?
I am.
Okay. Are you aware that subsequently they returned to the medical center and released them?
I am.
At any time from the time that Mr. Montgomery and Mr. Williams took the child to the hospital until the time that the child was transported to UT Medical Center, is it your contention that Mr. Montgomery had some other obligation?
Doesn't that cause for a legal conclusion?
Do you contend that Mr. Montgomery acted inappropriately in taking the child to the hospital?
No.
Do you contend that Mr. Montgomery acted inappropriately by contacting his immediate superior, Mr. Nadley?
No.
Do you contend that, based on your testimony today, since it's not child sex abuse, that Mr. Montgomery should have reported not child sex abuse?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Is it your contention, based on what you just said today, that the facts of this circumstance are not child sexual abuse? Is it your contention that he should have reported something that's not child sexual abuse?
It is my understanding that any allegations of abuse or neglect have to be reported. And then it's up to the hotline to use their decision tools to screen their referrals appropriately.
Can you take a look at that 14.1 child abuse hotline, please?
Yes,
Page 3.
yes.
May I approach you? On page 3, item 4. Section D. What does that say?
If the report alleges physical or sexual abuse or neglect on children ages 13 through 17 years old not in DCS custody, and the alleged perpetrator does not meet the above relationship criteria, the report will be referred to law enforcement by the Child Abuse Hotline.
Okay, let's talk about that for a second. These 4 alleged victims, 14 to 17. The 3 alleged perpetrators, 15 to 17. You've already told us they don't meet the relationship criteria for child sex abuse, correct?
Correct.
Would you repeat paragraph D, please?
D,
Yes.
if the report alleges physical or sexual abuse or neglect on children ages 13 through 17 not in DCS custody, and the alleged perpetrator does not meet the above relationship criteria, the report will be referred to law enforcement by the Child Abuse Hotline.
So, any of these children in DCS custody?
No.
Okay, so they wouldn't be investigated by DCS, but in fact, you would turn over the call to Sevier County law enforcement.
Correct.
Sevier County law enforcement who received the call from the hospital when Mr. Montgomery and Mr. Williams took the child to receive treatment.
Correct.
Okay. Read E, please.
All other allegations which do not meet the above criteria will be reported to law enforcement.
Okay, so let's talk about the child abuse section of the preliminary hearing for which we are here today.
Okay.
All other, and would you repeat that phrase for me?
All other allegations which do not meet the above criteria will be reported to law enforcement.
Okay, so the relationship criteria that you told us has not been met. Anything else related to that would be reported to law enforcement, correct?
Depends on what you're referring to.
Okay, I'm specifically referring to anything that anyone missed in the facts of this case would be reported to law enforcement because the relationship criteria is not met based on DCS policy.
No, because different allegations have different relationship criteria.
Okay. And the relationship criteria that we went over before was physical abuse.
Yes.
Work aid 1, 14.1, DCS child abuse hotline. What was the relationship criteria?
That one was the same. A parent or caretaker.
Judge, the court's already ruled on what is child sex abuse in the previous order. I don't know why. At some point, it becomes a moot because the court's already ruled that that argument fails.
Well, I appreciate
So we're just essentially repeating that motions that were argued.
I appreciate Mr. Pinkston's objection, Your Honor. However, this witness is placed here as a Special Investigations Unit team lead investigator responsible for the individuals who are investigating these 3 gentlemen for failing to report. More importantly, she has an underlying DCS investigation based on administrative policies and procedures, and as a result, I'm entitled to ask her what her understanding of all these definitions are and how to apply them based
I'm
on
going
the
to give you a
relationship
little leeway
criteria.
because we all know, and I know that the purpose of the preliminary hearings to see whether probable cause exists, to try to show probable cause doesn't exist, and also for other reasons. So I'm going to give you some leeway and allow you to ask.
Ms. Schultz, do you know if Principal Jarvis notified the victim, the alleged victim's mother pursuant to 49-6-1601?
I'm not sure.
Were you able to speak with Mr. Jarvis?
Yes.
Did you ask him that question? Did you call parents?
I don't recall if we specifically asked that question.
there questions for Ms. Schultz at this time, Your Honor? Pass the witness.
Morning, Ms. Schultz.
Good morning.
I'm Johnny Hewson, and I represent Mr. Williams. How did your investigation get launched? How did you get wind of this situation?
Our hotline in Nashville, Central Intake, received a referral, which was then sent to our assignment pool for screening and assignment.
Okay. And what day did your hotline receive that intake?
December the 30th.
December the 30th.
Correct.
And this incident was alleged to have occurred on the 23rd, is that correct?
The 22nd.
Well, the night of the 22nd and the 23rd of the a.m., correct?
Correct.
Okay, so we're talking about 1 week later, your office received a call.
Correct.
All right. Now, I noticed earlier when you testified, when you were asked by Mr. Pinkston, who had a duty to report, your response was everyone.
That is correct.
Okay. Who made that call?
Objection, Your Honor.
That's sustained.
Okay. Well, you know we're here, ma'am, don't you? Because it's alleged that these gentlemen didn't make the call.
Correct.
All right. Are you aware of any time frame requirements as to making the report?
No. It's always been my understanding it's supposed to be immediately, but I don't know that it's actually written in the statute. I'd have to review that.
You didn't receive a call from the treating physician, did you?
Objection, Your Honor, because again, is a backdoor to trying to find out who the referring is on the lack of supervision.
Your Honor, it's not a backdoor. These men have been singled out when there were many people. We go by what...
So ask the question, did your client make the call?
Well, that's not the only question I'd like to ask, Judge. Because these three men have
So
been
you're
singled out here.
You're asking whether medical personnel made the call?
Yes.
Now, the objection sustained.
Did you receive a call from the police department?
Objection, Your Honor, it's the same.
Sustained.
You have not spoken with Mr. Williams, is that correct?
That is correct.
But you have performed an investigation of the matter, haven't you?
It's currently still open.
So
So it's ongoing.
it's an ongoing investigation, correct?
Correct.
All right. Are you aware that Mr. Williams is not employed by the school system?
I am.
You are aware, are you not, that he is a volunteer assistant coach
Correct.
and that he receives no salary for that?
Yes.
Whom have you spoken with have you spoken with the principal
Yes.
at Ooltewah High School?
Yes.
And I'm certain as part of your investigation, you asked the principal, did you not, about any training that Mr. Williams had received insofar as what should be reported to DCS?
No, we did not ask that question.
So you don't know if Mr. Williams has ever received any instruction as to what things he should report to DCS and what he should not?
Correct. I'm not aware.
Are you aware of any Hamilton County policies on that?
No.
Have you done, is your investigation separate and apart from the investigation performed by the Sevier County Police or the Gatlinburg City Police?
Yes, we have done an interview together, but our investigations are separate.
And have you spoken with the investigating officer?
Yes,
For this
several.
case?
Yes, several times.
Do you know his name?
Rodney Burns.
Mr. Burns did not bring charges against Mr. Williams, did he?
No, he did not.
Matter of fact, Officer Burns hasn't brought charges against anyone other than the perpetrators in Sevier County, has he?
That's correct.
No more questions.
Ms. Schultz, my name is Lee Davis, and I represent Jesse Navely. May I ask you a few questions?
Yes.
So your testimony is everyone is a mandated reporter, is that correct?
That is correct.
And I just want to make sure, I'm not going to ask you any statute numbers or anything like that. I just want to make sure I understand what we're talking about. So under Tennessee law, anyone with knowledge that is required to make this call to the hotline, is that a fair understanding from your point of view?
Yes.
And then the call was supposed to be made immediate, I think was your testimony a little while ago.
Yes, correct.
So in this case, and I do not want you to violate any policy, don't tell me who called, but in this case, there's one call that's made on December 30th.
Correct.
Okay, and no more calls, it's just a single call.
Correct.
And I guess, is that an immediate call from your point of view, a call on the 30th, and this that happened on the 22nd?
No.
Okay, so that would not be an immediate call.
No.
So even that person calling would fall outside the statute of an immediate call.
It depends on when that person had knowledge of the situation.
Okay. And I will talk about what that knowledge means in a second, but I just want to first understand the universal reporting requirement. So if everyone, and I'm just looking at your testimony, everyone is a mandated reporter, is that safe to say?
That is correct.
So that would include anyone who witnessed the event?
Correct.
Is that right? Someone a fact witness, I saw something?
Correct.
Okay. Anyone who was told about the event by a fact witness?
Correct.
Any medical personnel who was related the facts of the event by the alleged victim?
Correct.
That person would be required to call?
Yes.
Anyone from law enforcement who was told by a victim of any incident, sexual or otherwise, would be a mandated reporter?
Correct.
Any parent who was told by their child that they had been a victim would be a mandated reporter?
Correct.
Any teacher who was told by a child or a child's friend in class about this incident would be a mandated reporter?
Correct.
And I guess the common thread that goes through all of these people's report is whether or not they had knowledge, right?
That is correct.
Is that true?
Yes.
And under your investigation, any of those people, if they were not the sole caller to the hotline, could be brought in on a petition to juvenile court for failure to make a report.
Objection, Your Honor, I think that calls for a legal conclusion.
I don't think so. She just testified. And maybe I'm wrong, but should I ask it again?
Well, rephrase your question.
All right. You understand you're testifying here today because a coach, an assistant coach, and an athletic director failed to report, right?
That is correct.
Okay. A doctor who had knowledge about, well, let's see, a parent who had knowledge of the same incident could be the next chair down here if they didn't make a report, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Another coach could be a person at this table if they didn't report.
Correct.
a police officer who had knowledge who didn't make a report could be at this table if they didn't make the report.
Correct.
And it could go on because the definition is everyone is a mandated reporter.
That is correct.
What is knowledge? Because again, back into that thread, what is knowledge to you?
Judge, and that calls obviously for a legal conclusion in regard to the statute.
Is your question what her understanding of knowledge is?
Yeah, or I'll ask it differently if that's getting too close to it. You agree with me, somebody who sees something, they have knowledge of it, they're a fact witness,
Yes.
right? You see this pen, you can testify that this pen's here, right?
Correct.
If you walk out in the hallway and you say, I saw Mr. Davis with a pen, the person you told it to, does that person have knowledge about whether or not I have a pen?
Yes.
Okay. And if they tell somebody, does that third person have knowledge?
Yes.
Okay. Where does that end?
All right, now I'll sustain the objection.
Okay. If somebody, if I understand the court's, I want to make sure I don't violate the court's rule. Her understanding knowledge, you feel she's testified to, and that's enough, right? That's what we're saying. You don't want me to ask her any questions further than that on the issue of knowledge.
Well, obviously, somewhere the line has to be drawn as to how far that goes. I understand the
We're saying it should be right about here, Your Honor.
the question, and I understand that. But I think you went beyond.
Gotcha. And we'll leave that for the court and not the witness, what you're telling me, right?
Yes.
Okay. All right. If in your testimony, your direct testimony, you said in your interview with Mr. Navely that he was under the impression that Mr. Williams had reported the incident. That's what you were told. Is that correct?
I don't believe it was Mr. Williams. I think it was Mr. Montgomery.
Okay. Maybe I didn't know. He's under the impression that Mr. Montgomery had reported it. From your point of view, does that absolve somebody from the reporting requirement?
No.
So you have to report it independently, even if somebody else reported it?
You have to be sure that it's reported, and without him knowing for certain that it had been reported, he was still under obligation to report.
And there's no way for anyone to know for certain it's been reported because these are confidential calls, right?
Correct.
And you can't disclose it even in a court of law. You can't disclose who made the call.
That's correct.
All right, so my question is, if somebody's under the impression that somebody else reported it, is that enough or not?
No.
Right. So in this case, there should have been, there could have been dozens of calls based upon doctors, police officers, investigators, parents, and coaches, administrators. Is that right?
Correct.
Do you find fault with the detective not calling you?
Objection. That's has been her opinion of the matter that really she has no knowledge of.
Sustained.
Okay. See if I can answer that differently. You understand that law enforcement has an important role to play in this?
Yes.
Okay. Is it reasonable to think that if law enforcement is investigating this thing, meaning the actual underlying charges, that coaches and parents don't need to be calling DCS about it, or do you think they still need to be?
Objection.
That's right.
That calls for speculation on the part.
Sustained.
Did you take out a petition against this person who called on December 30th?
No.
Okay. You told me before that that's not an immediate call.
No, I didn't take out a petition on anyone.
All right, well, okay, fair enough. If that person was here, you would testify that that call was not sufficient.
It depends on when they became aware of the situation. If they had just learned of the situation that day and made the call, then that would be immediate.
Okay. And from the department's policy, at what point does that become stale? I mean, the requirement to report.
I don't know that I
It's the
understand.
same objection, these are all questions asking for a legal conclusion.
Well, no,
It's not for-
I'm trying to ask a factual thing. Like right now, if these students go back to school, do the teachers have to call and report it?
In this specific case, I don't know that I understand what you're saying, because it is being investigated, and it's been very publicly known that it's being investigated. But we do get referrals of things that happened 5 years ago that we have to go back and investigate.
Okay. I'm just going back. You started this off by saying everyone is a mandated reporter, right?
Correct.
And so I'm just trying to figure out, so if everyone's a mandated reporter, and there is no end to the time when it needs to be reported, at what point can a reasonable person say, you know what, the law enforcement has this, the hospitals have this, the state has this, and at what point can you say that it's
All right.
taken care of?
Ms. Ray?
Objection again, Your Honor, that's speculation.
Yeah, Mr. Davis, if we knew the answer to that question, I think we would all be, would be pleased that we know, and I don't think this witness is the proper person to testify to that.
Okay, I'm just asking her because she is the lead investigator. I don't think if anybody would know it'd be her.
Do you know the answer to that question?
No.
All right, that's all I have.
Let me ask a couple of questions.
And I have 2 follow-ups, Your Honor.
I don't have any follow-up, so that can engage their follow-up.
All right, briefly.
Thank you.
Well, go ahead. Okay.
Ms. Schultz, we've talked about who called, they've lodged their objections, and the court's ruled. And for purposes of this hearing, Your Honor, I'm going to ask you to review Greenview Metro 2002 Tennessee Appellate Lexus 557, which says that the confidentiality provisions that Ms. Ray and Mr. Pinkston are relying on when it comes to notifying about the reporter are inapplicable when the relationship criteria are not met in a child sexual abuse matter.
Is this my copy?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Next, Ms. Schultz, you recognize those as the DCS Administrative Policies and Procedures Child Abuse Hotline 14.1, is that correct?
That is correct.
You also recognize 4K1.
That is correct.
I'd like to take those into exhibits, please, Your Honor. Exhibits 1 and 2.
No objection, I assume.
No objection.
You'll hand those to me, we'll mark that. The 14.1 will be marked as Exhibit 1, and Work Aid 1 will be marked as Exhibit 2.
Just a minute.
Yes.
You have previously testified that there was one call made to report this,
That is correct.
and you have performed a fairly thorough investigation at this point, have you not?
Yes.
So you have, I'm sure you feel like you have a pretty good handle on who knew what at what time, don't you?
Yes.
All right. Have you provided His Honor a list of people who should have reported this?
No.
It's a long list, isn't it?
Yes.
All right. Thank you very much for testifying today. You may be excused. I assume this witness may be excused?
Yes, sir. Dr. Rick Smith. I believe he has counsel present today, Judge. Mr. Green represents Mr. Smith.
All right. Welcome. If you'll identify your full name or your name for the record, please.
Zachary Green.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Green.
He's coming.
come up and raise your right hand and take an oath, please.
You solemnly swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Have a seat.
Thank you.
Good morning, sir. If you could state your name for the record, please.
Fred Richard Smith, Jr.
All right. And what is your current occupation?
I am superintendent of Hamilton County Schools.
How long have you been with the Department of Education?
33 years.
Does the Hamilton County Department of Education, I guess it's often abbreviated HCDE, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Do they have a policy for field trips?
Yes, sir.
All right. What particular policy do they have about overnight field trips?
Overnight field trips require a form in any documents accompanying that form to be filed with the particular level. That meaning that for elementary schools, they file that with elementary directors. For secondary schools, they file that with secondary directors. That secondary director's office will check that will check those forms for accuracy. If they find errors in those forms, they'll return those forms. We're very, very diligent about that. That form then is signed. It comes to the director's office, signed by the sponsor, signed by the principal, and then is signed by the director. Once that director's signature is secured, that then comes to my office to be forwarded to the secretary for the board to approve.
Okay. Was this, and you're aware that the Ooltewah High School basketball team traveled to Gatlinburg, Tennessee for a Christmas tournament between December 19th and 23rd of 2015?
Yes.
Was that an approved field trip?
Not by the Board of Education.
Okay. But at some point, a decision was made to go anyway?
Yes, sir.
That'd be fair to say. Okay. And it was never brought before the board, or the board?
It was not brought before the board. It was actually sent into the secretary director's office twice. It had a typo error. The second time that it actually arrived there was sent back to the school and never came back to that office.
All right. Now, does the Department of Education have a policy about reporting abuse and sexual abuse?
Yes, sir, we do. We have actually two policies. One is in the student section of our board policy manual. It is titled Neglect and Abuse. I believe it's numbered 6.409. That policy requires that individuals, any employee who has knowledge or suspected knowledge of any abuse, report that to one of three places. That would be law enforcement in the county where the child resides, or Department of Children's Services in the county where the child resides, or to the juvenile judge in the county where that child resides.
How is that, how are teachers, staff, coaches, otherwise made aware of those policies?
All of our policies are distributed to our schools, either both in written form and in electronic form. Some of our policies actually are electronically signatured by our employees each year. The neglect and abuse policy is not one of those. The policy that is electronically signed each year is the harassment, sexual harassment and discrimination policy, and I believe its number is 5.502, and it does in the body of that policy require reporting. It is also electronically signed by our employees each year.
Do the principals of each school have a particular duty to impart the reporting requirements
Yes,
to
sir.
staff?
Yes, sir, it does. 5.502 requires that principals or immediate supervisors actually disseminate those policies to their staff.
And if we could go particularly to the Gatlinburg incident, when were you first made aware of this incident?
At 11:09 on the morning of the 23rd of December.
Okay. And who made you aware of that?
Mr. Steve Holmes, Secondary Director for Hamilton County Schools.
All right. Now, how did they describe the incident, or what were you told?
I was actually sent two text messages, one at 11:09. The second text message came in at 11:23. The first message was somewhat general in the sense that we have, and I think it was reported by the principal because his name was actually, Jim Jarvis is the principal's name, was actually named, his first name in that particular communication. It imparted that we had had an incident. Ooltewah High basketball team players, 3 had assaulted another one of their teammates. There was an injury to that particular student. That student actually had been transported to the hospital and appeared to have needed some medical attention. The 3 students had been arrested and had left the scene of which was a cabin, the scene where they were actually housed. The second message that came in at 11:23 was a bit different. It was communicated from Mr. Nadley to Steve Holmes, most of which was the same, other than the fact that the students had not been arrested. There was actually a report that was going to be filed that the student appeared to be actually not as seriously injured as he was, and so there was some information in those 2 communications, those 2 text messages were a little bit different, but they came from different sources.
All right. You were never made aware by any telephone means?
No.
Okay. Now, I think you phrased it as that was reported to you, an incident and/or an assault.
Yes.
Okay. Were you ever made aware that there were potential other victims?
No.
All right. And were you ever made aware that that was potential sexual assault?
I knew it was a sexual assault from description of there being a sexual abuse with what was described as a pool cue.
Okay. All right. And who imparted that to you, sir?
Mr. Holmes did.
Okay. All right. And did it discuss what the pool cue was upon the child?
Yes.
Okay. All right. No mention of the other ones, just this one particular.
Correct.
Now, what would be in this instance, the field trip, what would be the line of authority or the chain of command as it goes up to you?
It would start out with a sponsor at the school. It would have to go through the principal's office for approval. It would then be sent to the director, in this case, Secondary Director Steve Holmes, for approval. It then would go to our office to be actually sent to the board secretary, Ms. Ann Bates, to actually go to the Board of Education.
All right. Was there ever a discussion if this matter had been reported to either law enforcement or DCS?
The first communication I had from Mr. Holmes at 11:09 indicated that law enforcement was involved. Actually, I believe it mentioned arrest of the 3 individuals involved. I knew from the second communication at 11:23 that also police were involved, were there, because detective was actually mentioned in that second communication.
And I apologize, I should have made this clear. Were you present in Gatlinburg during this trip?
No, sir.
Where were you?
I was in Chattanooga.
You were in Chattanooga, okay. All right, and at some point, sir, did you interview Mr. Montgomery and Mr. Nathan?
I did.
In regard to what?
Well, and forgive me for belaboring, I guess, a little bit longer, but we did not get very much information at all after the 23rd. Very, very little information came to us. And I understand that, because anytime police are involved in a matter like this, I would not expect them to share information with us. I communicated with our board attorney, Scott Bennett, on December the 30th to ask him would it be appropriate for us to set up interviews with. I'm sorry.
Instructing my client not to give away conversations he's had with the.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
So you contacted him, but not
Yes, contacted our board attorney. We decided to interview employees on Monday the 4th, and we're going to interview students on Tuesday the 5th.
Did Mr. Montgomery when you interviewed him,
Yes.
did he make you aware of what he understood had occurred during the trip, in particular night of 22nd?
He did. In fact, for clarity, I interviewed all 3 individuals with Dr. McDade in the room taking notes.
And it must be clear who the 3 individuals are.
Yes.
Mr. Montgomery, Mr. Williams, and Mr. Nathan.
No, I interviewed Principal Jarvis first, followed by Assistant Principal Nadley, followed by Coach Montgomery. We never interviewed Mr. Williams.
Any reason, sir?
Yes, sir. We intended to do so. I received a call from our attorney. I received a call later that afternoon to stop any further interviews. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
And Mr. Nadley and Mr. Montgomery, when you spoke with them, neither admitted to you that they contacted law enforcement or DCS.
Yeah, Mr. Jarvis indicated to us that he had been in contact with Mr. Nadley, had contacted him, and that both law enforcement and DCS had been contacted. When we talked to Mr. Montgomery later that morning, he indicated to us that the doctor at the hospital had contacted both law enforcement and DCS.
So essentially the answer was no, they were relying on what they thought other people had done.
Right.
Thank you.
Mr. Smith, what's your title?
I am superintendent of Hamilton County Schools.
For how long?
I've been superintendent now 4 years and 8 months.
When does that end?
It would end by contract on June the 30th of 2019.
Okay. When you say it would end by contract, you mean that's when the term would expire?
Yes.
Okay. Is it scheduled to end sooner than that?
Not,
Bias of witness, I'm entitled to question him about any impeachment I can provide with respect to his testimony today, and elicit such prejudices as necessary to persuade the court that he's a not credible witness.
Mr. Green?
I don't think the term of this contract is relevant. I don't see how that goes to bias, Your Honor. I mean, there's been nothing here yet in the questioning to indicate bias.
Thank you, Mr. Green. Mr. Rowe, that's exactly what I was trying to connect the dots on.
I can connect that dot for you, Your Honor.
All right, when you ask the question.
Thank you.
That one question, then we're going to move on from that subject.
Sure. So, Mr. Smith, here's my question. It is just very simple. Has your contract been blown out?
no, sir.
It's a question that was not the question that was previously asked.
Witness answer. All right, Mr. Douglas, continue.
Now, you told Mr. Pinkston who you received information from and how the school works with respect to permission slips. How does it work in Hamilton County Department of Education policy for reporting? A teacher witnesses an incident and then reports to him under the policy.
And just for clarity, sir, are you referring to a incident to this degree? How that would be reported?
Are there multiple policies?
There are multiple reporting.
Okay, let's go over each one.
Yeah, if we have a student discipline matter at school, that would be reported by a teacher. It would be accompanied by a referral.
To whom?
It would be sent to the administrator.
Okay.
If there may be multiple administrators in the school, it could be sent to an assistant principal. I served as a disciplinary assistant principal for quite some time in schools, and that particular referral then would be dealt with by that particular administrator. More serious matters, similar to a suspendable matter. Let's say that you have a fight, and you're the administrator of record that gets the referral, have the students. There's only one individual in that particular building that can actually suspend students, and that's the principal. So the principal is going to have to be notified by his assistants and/or teachers, what happened and any relevant information that with regard to that, so that the principal can make a decision about suspension. If we have a matter where a particular disciplinary matter is elevated to where it would be a zero tolerance offense, where a student may bring something to school that met that threshold of zero tolerance, then that would be something that's not handled by the school administration. That actually comes to a hearing officer at the district office. Dr. Lee McDade serves as our hearing officer.
Okay. Now let's go back to my question, which is, in this, you described to Mr. Pinkston that someone called to Mr. Holmes and Mr. Holmes called you.
Yes, texting.
What policy is that process logged under in the Hamilton County Department of Education?
There's not a policy in terms of people like Mr. Holmes actually reporting to me. It's just a protocol that obviously we follow.
Okay.
Our directors with certain instances are going to notify me directly.
And you told Mr. Pinkston in the beginning that you have a policy 6.049 or 409
6.409.
that makes everyone a mandatory reporter for purposes of the mandatory reporting law, right?
It's relevant.
Wait, Mr. Wait. I'm sorry. Oh, I thought you said wait, Mr. Green. I think the question calls for a legal conclusion, and I think the question was unclear as to whether the policy makes someone a reporter under the reporting law.
That wasn't the question, Your Honor, but I'll rephrase it. The question is 6.409,
409.
Hamilton County Department of Education requires what of its employees?
It requires in the matters of neglect and child abuse for the reporting to be as the law prescribes.
Okay. Does it require it to be reported to you?
No.
So why did you get a call?
It's protocol in our Department of Education that certain matters are going to be reported to me.
So there's an unwritten rule?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And you told Mr. Pinkston that the permission form wasn't properly completed. Who's supposed to tell the children or the particular teacher, no, you can't go? Is that you?
I'm sorry, I misunderstand the question.
If a permission slip is inappropriately filled out
Okay.
and not approved by the board, who's supposed to call the students and the teacher, or just the teacher for that matter, and say you can't go on the trip?
It's the school. No, it's the school personnel that's responsible for accuracy on that form and communicating that information to their employees and to their students.
So your contention is that the principal should have told them, no, don't go?
It could have been the principal, it could have been the assistant principal, it could have been the sponsor, in this case, the basketball coach.
When you talk to Mr. Montgomery, Mr. Jarvis, and Mr. Nadley, none of them told you they had anything to hide, did they?
No,
They were forthright, weren't they?
I would assume so, yes.
Did you ask questions of them?
Yes.
Did they stutter?
No,
Did they backtrack?
don't recall that.
Did they refuse to answer
No.
questions? So they were forthright, weren't they? Now, you talked a lot about what everybody else did, Mr. Holmes, Mr. Day, Mr. Montgomery, Mr. Nagley. Let's talk about what you did.
Mm-hmm.
Did you fulfill your responsibilities at 11:09/12/23 to notify the Board of Education?
I did not notify the Board of Education until the 24th.
Between 11:09 and 12:23, what time on the 24th did you notify the Board?
I believe it was 2:08 p.m.
2:08 p.m.? So for those 26 hours, what did you do?
I know that in the situation like this one, when police department personnel are involved in an investigation, it is incumbent upon us to not get involved at all in that investigation. In fact, our involvement in that investigation may create a problem of reporting, where you could have a police department report and a Department of Education report, which would very much complicate the matter. I knew that the police department involvement would absolutely keep us out and should keep us out. We did not need to compromise that investigation. What I decided to do at that point is to focus on the things that I knew we were going to be dealing with, and that's going to be personnel matters and student discipline. I felt like at that time that legally we should stay within our boundaries with regard to those two issues and deal with those two matters, and let law enforcement deal with the legal issues.
Okay. Were the boys suspended, the alleged perpetrator?
They were.
This was during Christmas break?
Yes.
School was back in session on what date?
January the 4th. January 4th being reporting back to work for employees. Our students were not to report back until the 8th. 7th, I'm sorry. Thursday the 7th.
During that time, did you know that Mr. Nadley, strike that, did you know that Mr. Montgomery was in the hospital with the child?
I did not know that personally, but he told me that he had been there, yes.
Did you know that Mr. Jarvis went to the hospital?
I did.
To see the child?
I did.
Did you know that the parents were notified of the incident?
I did not know directly through any mechanism that I knew that the parents were notified.
Your Honor, could you like to have a discussion about Green and why my asking him if he called is acceptable based on that court's reasoning on the confidentiality provisions of the law?
I'll agree.
First, Your Honor, with respect to that Green v. Metro case, 2002 case, the issue there was...
Actually, let me take
Yes, sir.
at least a quick look at it. We've gone for an hour and 20 minutes, and as much as I hate to, let me look. We're going to take about a 5-minute recess, no longer than 5 minutes.
Yes, sir.
All rise.